Hello and welcome to Now and Zen. Today's guest is Anna Maria Hefele, and she is an accomplished overtone singer and recently has released something called the Lambdoma project, which involves lots of cool microtones and chimes, and she also has her own overtone singing class online. So welcome.
Hello.
We're so happy to have you here on the show today.
I'm also very happy to be there.
Yes. With the Lambdoma tuning, what exact microtonal scale has been used for the chimes? Because I know that when you play those, we tend to hear a chord with all of the overtones in it or something similar. But can you describe that tuning a little bit?
Well, as far as I get it, it's a relationship between frequencies, and the relationships are always whole numbers. So I got into it because I'm a friend of the artist who built it, and he asked me for an exhibition to do the sound recording for a performance, and did audio recordings with other musicians first. And then I tried it out myself and fell completely in love with it. And when I play it, when I stand in it, it feels very logical on a very intuitive level for me. I am so familiar with overtone and undertone scales from the voice. So I could kind of move in the space and pretty close intuitively knew what will be the next note, even though I had no idea about the matrix or the tuning or whatever. But I could kind of intuitively find my way around the tunings. And the system is the Lambdoma, in total, it's approximately, it's 260 something chimes. And yeah, those frequency relationships are always whole numbers. So like 1/8 and 2/8 and 3. And so it forms overtone and undertone series. So, and there's also some notes in the system that are exactly the same. So I could travel from the same note to another scale where it's representing a number ratio, basically. So for example, I could start on one, like the fourth harmonic, and go up into the scale, and then turn around in 90 degrees. And then the role and the function of the one that was in one angle was the fourth harmonic. In the other direction, it suddenly was part of the undertone scale. And I could move up in a minor third and so on. It really depends which note I'm working on. Yeah, but my approach so far was more intuitive to work with it. And I'm still reading and trying to figure out all the systematics behind.
So it sounds like the space that you're in, not just getting to play the chimes, but also being surrounded by them, is really influential to the experience of performing then.
Yes.
I always wondered if you can actually hit the tall chimes that are really high, because if you look at the video, and everyone who's listening to this needs to go watch the video, there's the chimes are all sort of spread out in this room, and like along the edges the chimes are lower to the ground, and then in the middle the chimes are really high. So is it difficult to reach those high ones, or do you think you can reach most of the chimes while you're in the center of the room? Like, how is it logistically playing them?
It works quite well. The instrument builder built the instrument in a way that it works. So the scale, it just goes up to the 8th harmonic, and then it's ending. So the high tubes, they are quite short, but he has built some, like what the hammers that are inside the piano, and put them on long sticks. So that's something you can use to prolong the arm and really reach the high ones. And then there are plenty of different mallets, because they're also in these 4 squares. So the Lambdoma matrix is like 4 times a Lambdoma matrix tuned on different basic notes that are in relationship to each other. So like one is approximately C, based on C, the other one on D, and then one on F and one on G of those squares. And there are also different material used. I mean, the material is the same, but the tubes some of them have very thick walls and big diameter, and some of them are thinner. And depending on what sort of tubes with some the high ones sound better, and with other ones the lower ones sound better. And depending on the thickness of the material and the diameter of the tube, I tried to use different mallets, because for the thick and low ones I needed the like really big mallet, which is very soft, when I try to get as much as possible from the fundamental sound of those chimes. And for the high ones, smaller mallets work better, because with the thick one you don't get much sound out of it. So it's a constant also changing between what sort of mallets to use.
That really makes sense as well, since I suppose with chimes, the fundamental pitch you hear is sometimes, I think, implied by the higher frequencies. These certainly seem to be very special chimes, because at least when I was learning about chimes all those years ago, I learned that they were fairly like inharmonic sounding instruments as metal bars, where, you know, that fundamental might not even be part of the sound, but your brain is creating it. So are these chimes like specially tuned in any way such that they actually have a harmonic nature when you hit them or something? I'm not the chime expert.
I think they do.
It sounds really blended and together.
Well, the chimes together are tuned extremely precise. And the artist Josef Baier, who built the instrument, he said he needs tuning time 1 hour per chime. So he's sitting quite a long time to tune the instrument and make it all fit together perfectly. So, and my challenge was in the playing was more like practicing to really get the fundamental out of the chime, because it's a lot easier to get higher frequencies out of it. And it was rather difficult to get really to the low tone. And this is just what I tried. But I also talked to Josef, and he said, well, in the classical orchestras, usually they also work with the harmonics and do use higher frequencies, harmonics of chimes, but I haven't gotten to that yet.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. It never occurred to me that it would be so difficult to hit the chime so that the fundamental rings like during the performance. That's a really important insight, I think. When you were performing this piece, did you use notation, or were you sort of guided to do things in a specific way? Was it all improvisational? How does that work for you?
It's completely improvisation, very free. Basically, what I try to do is like to become quiet and empty your mind and empty everything and connect and breathe, and then see where it goes, and just start like a performance. And it ended up like being, I think we did 3 takes of longer performance, half an hour, 45 minutes each, of like really being on the trip in the soundscape. And later I tried to edit and put the nicest parts together and stuff, but it totally did not work at all.
The editing?
So no, I spent 2 days trying to edit, and I noticed no, editing is not possible for that, because the energetic flow doesn't work anymore.
Right.
So I kept really like one single performance. I had to choose one, which is difficult.
Yes.
So I chose one, and we did a full edit of that one, which is 27 minutes. And I think in 2 places, I took out like 30 seconds. And then from the other longer takes, I took out those snippets you find on YouTube. So it's different material from the full performance.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and all the outcome, it was quite spontaneous to do the recording, because the instrument was on exhibition in Germany somewhere, and before the exhibition opened, I then got spontaneously the chance to go there and do something. So we went for one afternoon, and I had like 3-4 hours to get familiar with the instrument, and then next day we came back and did already like technical setup and shooting. So I had like 3-4 hours to get familiar and to practice, and that's it. So the outcome is a short journey with the instrument, but I loved it very much. And yeah, right now I just got an email a couple of days ago that I get some funding for an album production with it.
Yes.
So I'm planning on that to start recording probably in May, and I'm calling people in the space. So we will probably do it in Slovakia in an old synagogue, where I know the people who run it. It's an art space now with artist in residence program. So we will probably do it there, and I will invite some more musicians. And yeah, I'm so much looking forward to it. And Josef Baier as well. He's also totally enthusiastic. Yeah, so I will have the time to practice on it more next year with other people together. And I'm very much looking forward to how it will end up.
Yes, this is extremely exciting news. And of course, one of the things that I was wondering was, what kinds of future projects will this installation sort of spawn? Because it's really a beautiful installation and of course your performance is alluring. So just to recap, the entire Lambdoma performance that you picked, that is all on your Overtone Singing website if you want to see the full performance, but you're releasing little teasers on YouTube every once in a while.
Yes, exactly. Like we made a full 27-minute edit and I put it in my web shop. So you can get it for €5, which is a little support to keep me producing stuff, basically. And there you get like link and passcode. It's on Vimeo, and also the WAV files and pictures and some infos, and some shorter parts are on YouTube.
Yeah.
And some more will come next year when we work on more materials.
I'm really excited to see what's in sort of the rest of the performance. I was sort of surprised and excited in the third teaser that you released on YouTube when you played like the otonal C chord and then you used like E flat and E at the same time, and then the chord was holding, and then you dampened the E flat. That was a really cool effect. Is there a lot of that sort of technique in the full improvisation?
I just like tried to connect and feel, and I didn't plan so much of what I will do.
Yeah.
But specifically that part was something I did in another take with overtone scales and pure thirds with like major and minor. Mm-hmm. And so I just played around with those pure thirds tunings. I think it's not part of the long one so much.
One thing I was wondering, of course, was how you get like such a beautiful tone with the overtone singing, and also how you isolate the overtones so well. And it seems like those go hand in hand, right? Are you using the tongue technique to sort of achieve that effect?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are two main techniques I also teach. So one is called one cavity technique or vowel technique, where you just use the whole vocal tract to modulate the sound with vowels. So it's making vowel transitions between E and U, like English U and French oui, and doing that super slowly. I can show it quickly.
It'd be great. Wow.
So, and that can be learned quite fast by students, but it's also quite limited in how loud the overtones get. So it will not be much louder than what I did. And then there's another technique called two-cavity technique, where the tongue is elevated like an American R, like in bird or Harry, or an L position where the tongue is very wide. So the shape in the mouth of the tongue is more like an N, but there's a tiny opening somewhere in the back which makes it an L, but the tongue is wide and flat. So it's not an L as it would be in speaking. And there you can get the overtones a lot louder. So something like that. Yeah, and the rest in clarity is for music editing, a little bit of EQing, basically.
Yeah, I saw that cool video that you have with the spectrograph, where you're overtone singing, and then we see the spectrograph give you the notes.
The spectrogram is not an EQ, so the spectrogram is just showing what is actually there,
right?
Without amplifying anything anymore. But of course, in music, I sometimes, or music production, I try to reduce the fundamental in the EQing. So the overtone is a bit even more audible. And I mean, acoustically, what works with instruments or with a choir or an orchestra, so then the instrument or the other people, they also are in the same frequency range of my fundamental. So then there's an effect happening. It's called masking in acoustics.
Yes.
So basically the other people, sounds, instruments, musicians, they hide my fundamental a little bit, and this makes the overtones stick out extra. And this just, it works in the concert very well as well. So it's no technical things involved there.
So you are using mixtures of various techniques, first cavity, second cavity, tongue technique, as well as being production savvy to make sure that those overtones are clearly heard.
Just two main techniques. So one is one cavity or vowel, and the second one is two cavity or tongue technique. It just, you could call it both, but it's just the two types.
Would you say you use one technique more than the other, or do you use them about equally? Do you use them for different special circumstances? Like, how does that work?
I only use tongue. So the vowels usually I use in teaching to get people there. Because it's the first step, because it's a lot easier to learn control the vowel technique and the overtones in the vowels. And first you have to learn hearing overtones in the first place. And as soon as you can start hearing them, you can also start learning to control them. And when you can already control them and hear them, and then I add more of the other technical aspects, because starting out with the tongue technique, it's a lot of different parts inside your mouth and tongue, and it's just a bit too difficult to start with it right away. To have good result, it must become very, very precise, which requires a lot of practice.
What would you say is sort of the best way to practice, if you're just messing with overtone singing, kind of hearing the harmonics in your own voice easily? I guess what I'm asking is if you would have any tips or tricks for finding harmonics in your own voice and knowing what's happening, because I know that personally, I sometimes will try an overtone sing, and maybe I'll be like cycling through some overtones, and I don't like immediately know like which overtone I'm on. Like when I start, I have to like go through it and kind of like find it and then be like, oh, okay, that's the seventh harmonic, so I'm here.
Well, you're on the best way to getting there. So this is just about practice.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing like that a violin player just takes the instrument and the hand and knows exactly and plays in tune right from the beginning. And the beginner of the violin has to search around, like, how far do I put the finger there that this note is in tune in relation to the rest? But a professional doesn't need to do that.
Right.
So it's really like you listen to yourself, you try to be patient, you do it and you do it again and again and again. And at some point, your brain recognizes positions and how something feels. But also, like, which overtone is where in your feeling, perception, and vowel. it totally depends on the pitch of the fundamental. So if you practice on one note and then you start finding the scale and the overtones, and then you move up or down a third or a fifth, then your placement is totally off. So you have to start searching from scratch again if you change fundamental note. And also depending on the pitch of the fundamental, it's different where the range of the overtone starts and ends. So the lower your fundamental, the higher you can go up in your overtone scale, and the higher the fundamental, the more you can go low in the overtones, but can't go very high up. Because there's like a total range where you can sing and filter the overtones, which is approximately between 350 hertz and 3,500. And you just can't go below or above, even though there are more overtones there. But the mouth can't amplify them anymore, because there's a limit of how small and squeezed you can make an E vowel, E, oo, E. There's just a limit of how much you can move your mouth. And with oo the same. So there's a limit of how dark can I make this oo, like you, oo, oo, oo.
Right.
And this is the limit for which overtones you can get.
So when you are switching fundamentals, that's obviously a really advanced technique, and I'm sure it would require a lot of practice, as you've mentioned. When you are doing that sort of thing, are you particularly thinking of one part? Like if you're singing, like a two-part melody and the fundamental is changing, but the overtone note is also changing. Do you think of the overtone note in the melody, or do you always think of the fundamental first, or is it like a mixture?
I think in the melody, in the overtones, but of course it always goes together. So the problem is if you imagine the melody and the overtone right, but you're slightly out of tune in your fundamental, nothing will work.
Oh,
so so you have to be really, really precise in the pitch of the fundamental and in finding the overtone, and it really goes together all the time. And if one thing is slightly off, then the result is not so good.
So it definitely requires not only a lot of precision, but an extraordinary amount of familiarity as well. That's really inspiring. How is overtone singing? How has it changed your classical singing? Because I know there are some really important connections there.
Yeah, different aspects. So one thing that happens when you practice overtone singing is that the voice gets really strong and the diaphragm, and so you gain some high notes in your register in the singing, and you totally train your ability to hear, and your hearing becomes so much more precise. Because usually what people hear, is they hear the pitch and think that's the note and the tone, and they hear timbre or sound color, that's the overtones. And in overtone singing, you really learn to listen to it much more precise, and you learn some analytical way of hearing sound. So you learn to not hear just the sound as a fundamental, but to hear which overtone is stronger in the sound and which one is less. You even start to hear overtones in the railway, or in the vacuum cleaner, or in whatever noise. You start hearing the higher frequencies, which you didn't hear before. So that really changes perception, and is also an advantage for choir singers or other singers. Then the other thing is the overtone singing follows a total different concept than classical singing. So they're quite opposite. They use the same tools, so the sound production is the same, but what the vocal tract does is totally opposite. So in normal and classical singing technique, you try to minimize the effort of the vocal cords and to open your mouth and certain technical things that the sound really can project to the audience very well with minimum or a minimized effort in the vocal cords. And in overtone singing, I do the opposite. I make a huge, loud, intense sound with my voice, and then I don't open the mouth at all, and I filter out all of those frequencies unless one, and the one I leave there and amplify additionally, and then you hear those two notes. So I produce huge fat sound and delete most of it before it leaves my mouth. That's the technique. And classical singing is just the opposite. So, and when you train something onto your body and singing very much in one technique, it's always difficult to let go of something you're very used to in order to learn something that is total opposite. So that's also a challenge then.
Yes, of course. So I guess, would you say overtone singing is more exhausting to your diaphragm than classical singing? Like, does it train that muscle more, you think?
No, it's just different. But I don't find it more exhausting. Both, also classical singing is really demanding.
Yeah, that's really neat. Cool. Well, I'd love to also talk a little bit about sort of microtonal situations where you're using the overtone scale, because I think most of our listeners are quite aware of this, but the overtone scale is out of tune with 12-tone equal temperament, and some of the intervals are basically almost the same, such as the perfect fifth, but some of the intervals, such as the 7th, 11th, and 13th partials, are quite out of tune with 12-tone equal temperament. Have you ever been in a situation where you've had to sing overtones that are out of tune with 12-tone equal temperament, but there are instruments playing those notes? Or like, has there ever been a clash between overtones and 12-tone equal temperament that you've had to deal with as a performer?
Well, yes, of course. It's always the difficulty. So what works well is working together with a choir, other singers, or with strings.
Yes, yeah.
Because they can adjust. And with my own ensemble, Supersonos, the European Resonance Ensemble, it's called, we have overtone singing, Jews harp, harpsichord, nyckelharpa, and Estonian kanel. And it's all about the very overtone-rich sounds of the instruments. So we also released an ECM album in 2019. You can find it on Spotify. It's called Resonances. And there in the ensemble, we purely use a Valotti tuning system.
Oh, that's Valotti.
It works so much better. So I have big difficulty with equal temperament, of course. And Valotti is just not nice, or some mean tone tunings work better as well. And if I really perform with equal temperament, I have to focus very much on putting the fundamental in tune with everything. And then it often happens that the overtone is flat compared to the music, but that doesn't disturb the ear very much. But my brain usually functions in the way that I focus a lot on the overtone, and I tend to put the overtone in tune. And then the fundamental is often high, and this sounds really bad. So when working with equal temperament, I have to put extra care and attention of putting the intonation of the fundamental as relaxed as I can to blend it, and that the overtones are out of tune doesn't disturb, actually.
I see. Yeah, because the fifth partial of the overtone series, and thus the 10th and the they are just a little bit, they're enough out of tune with 12-tone equal temperament that you can notice it, but it might also pass as the note that it's closest to. Like I think it's about 15, I want to say 15 cents, but I think that's wrong. No, wait, 14 cents. Yeah. So that's, not too far. Can you bend overtones sharp and flat based on their fundamental? Is that possible? Or
no.
Is that?
Well, I have to obey the laws of physics.
Yes, of course.
So if I want to bend, I have to bend fundamental and overtone, because I can move them both in the same direction, like so I can do certain glissando and bending, but of course only together. And if I try to go lower with fundamental and go higher with overtone, then you have some steps. So random going down glissando with fundamental, but the overtones kick in as steps at certain points, which is in this case also random, but they can't do a glissando in this direction.
I see. That's interesting. Ways to get around that. How does vibrato affect overtone singing? If you do a lot of vibrato, is it hard to keep things straight enough so that you can hear the overtone, or what does that do?
Yes, I mean, I try to sing very flat in overtone singing because, I mean, if I do a vibrato, it's the fundamental doing the vibrato and the overtone is doing the vibrato, and it becomes unclear to hear or like less audible compared to a quite flat sound. But I also don't need to make it super, super, super flat all the time. So it's a musical parameter I can use when I make music. Of course, like to start relaxing the sound a little, and maybe there's something coming which also makes the sound alive. So it's something you can totally play with and choose. But also in teaching and workshops, I try to get the people to make very flat sounds.
Right.
And there are some people that just can't. So sometimes there are people that always have some vibrato in the voice and can't get rid of it. And there it's getting really difficult to make them hear any overtones at all in their voice.
That does sound like a really difficult situation. Definitely
Yes.
had students like that myself. Well, I have one final question for you about microtonality. What's the weirdest sounding microtonal scale you've ever sung with? Like the most farthest away from 12th tone equal temperament. Maybe you've used the 11th and the 13th harmonics sometimes.
I didn't really had any of those very crazy collaborations, I must say. But end of January, I will have a concert performance in Stuttgart at Eclat Festival, very contemporary music. And there's a piece written for me as a soloist together with SWR Vocal Ensemble and marimba and 12-tone harpsichord. Not 12. It's quarter note tuning, like equal temperament and equal temperament, a quarter note apart. So I think that will be quite the weirdest thing.
I wonder if you have ever worked with the Harry Partch instruments or plan to do that. So Harry Partch was an American composer. He brought a big interest of just intonation back to sort of American music. He built sort of an entire orchestra of various instruments that used his microtonal tuning system, which is a just scale that uses 43 different notes per octave. And not all of the instruments use all 43 notes in an octave. There are some of them that may only have like 7 or 8 notes per octave that are a subset of the 43. But he viewed everything as kind of like coming from that. You know, when I see Lambdoma and all of these chimes in this space, I'm immediately reminded of the visuals and aesthetics of the Partch instruments as well, because it's just wonderful to be in a room with something that's that impressive and to hear the sound coming from it, like the real experience of it.
If anybody likes to join, there's some online Zoom classes on overtone.academy, and you can sign up. So there's one every month, and you'll also find the full Lambdoma recording there.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks for inviting.
Yes, this has been a very fun conversation.
Cool. Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you.
Great.
Great to meet you.
Thank you too.
All right, I'll see you later.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Microtonal Podcast, Now and Zen. As mentioned previously, you can hear the full Lambdoma improvisation online at overtone.academy, whose link is also in the description/show notes. My personal favorite moment in this extended improvisation is when Anna Maria Hefele plays the tonic notes of each of the 4 Lambdoma sections all in a row, sometimes doing so in such a quick manner that the chimes collide slightly with other nearby chimes. The sound produces a Pythagorean suspended chord, with the octave equivalent notes 1/1, 9/8, 4/3, and 3/2. I have also provided 2 other resources: a transcription of the very first Lambdoma excerpt posted on YouTube, which is on the Stephen Weigel YouTube channel, and a Patreon-exclusive bonus episode on the structure of the Lambdoma tuning system and other observations. Also, be sure to check out Josef Baier and Thomas Radelwimmer. We have a lot of episode guests down the line. Our next episode will feature film composer Stephen James Taylor. Thanks so much to our patrons on Patreon, our Zen Harmonic patrons, as well as our Zen Harmonic gods: Mike Battaglia, Sheldon Bird, Barry Lemon, Adam Freese, Matthew Sheeran, Vincenzo Sicarella, Hector McGuffin, Christopher Bailey, Leland O. Weigel, Amy Coleman, Joe Weigel, and Tina Harmon Cartel. If you like the podcast, please spread the word, and share this with anyone you think might be interested. If you leave a review on iTunes, that really helps us out. It's entirely due to the efforts of listeners like you that the podcast has grown as much as it has. We also have a YouTube channel, so consider subscribing to that if you haven't. You can also find us on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. If the Patreon account gets to 60 patrons, Now and Zen will go back to making episodes regularly instead of sporadically. Again, thank you so much for listening, and catch you next time on Now and Zen.